So we are on our way to Brazil. In a few hours, you will be exploring the museums and the galleries, the flora and the fauna, and just absorbing the street life in this country. If you're lucky, you will hear some of the popular music in the streets, but chances of hearing some of the serious art music are really not very great. In the next few minutes, I would like to share with you a bit of the art music of Brazil. It is said that Brazil is the most musical country in the world, and that music is a soundtrack to life in Brazil. We have all heard of the samba, and perhaps of the extravagant music and dance of Le Carnaval in Rio, but we've not heard much of the serious art music that comes from this country. For that reason, I would like to take a few minutes today and share some of that music with you. There are really quite a few Brazilian composers from which we could select, but I've chosen to work with the music of Hector Villa-Lobos, a composer whose works are sometimes played by orchestras in Europe and North America. You may have encountered some of that already, or you may have a chance to encounter some of that in the future. Before we talk more about him, let's experience a little of his music. Here's an excerpt of one piece that has some Brazilian flavor to it. Villa-Lobos was born in Rio de Janeiro in 1887. That was just after the Civil War in the U.S. and in the middle of the reign of Queen Victoria in England. It was also the year that slavery was abolished in Brazil. Hector's father was a librarian and an amateur musician who hosted frequent performances in their home. Hector was given the opportunity for formal music study, but he rejected it after a few lessons and became essentially self-taught. He was a proficient performer on cello and guitar, and he learned harmony and music theory mostly by listening to the performances hosted by his father in their home. Unfortunately, his father died suddenly when Hector was only 12 years old. Hector had to contribute some to the family income by playing cello in cinemas and theater orchestras in Rio. He also hung out with the performance and performed with many of the street musicians. His mother began pressuring him to go to music school, but he would not consider that. Instead, he took off for the interior parts of Brazil, traveling for several years, absorbing Brazilian culture. I can picture him going off with his backpack and his guitar into the Amazon forests. Some of his earliest compositions came from this period, and they contain elements of indigenous cultures as well as the influences from Portuguese and African cultures, which were becoming amalgamated into Brazilian life. That is not to say that European style was not without influence. Hector married a concert pianist who regularly performed music of the European masters. European and American musicians frequently visited Brazil as either performers or conductors, and he talked with them and they frequently listened to his music. The French composer Darius Milhaud was a particular influence on him and introduced him to the French composers such as Debussy. The pianist Arthur Rubinstein often visited Rio and took a liking to Villa-Lobos, performed a number of his works, and took his works on tour whenever Rubinstein played in the United States and throughout Europe. Rubinstein encouraged Villa-Lobos to travel abroad so his works would become better known. And in 1923, Villa-Lobos did go to Paris. There he conducted some of his works by orchestras, and he had a chance to meet composers such as Aaron Copland and exchange ideas and music with him. Villa-Lobos returned to Brazil in 1930 for what he thought was only going to be a short time to conduct a concert. But a revolution was taking place within the country, and he was not permitted to leave. During this period of political upheaval, Villa-Lobos became quite involved in writing Brazilian music to promote his local culture. And it was during this period that he composed Baquinas Brasilias, a series of 9 pieces that combine the style of the German musical master Johann Sebastian Bach with Brazilian folk music. It's one of these compositions on which I want to focus today. The question becomes, how shall we approach this music? How do we hear the parts of it that make it uniquely Brazilian? How do we understand what Villa-Lobos was trying to tell us about his country through this music? This, as many music compositions, have a main idea or a theme. Musicologists believe that this particular theme came from Brazilian folk music. As you listen to it, you will notice that it has much syncopation, accents that occur in unexpected places. This no doubt came from the African rhythms that were part of the music that the slaves brought to Brazil. They might also be attributed to some of the Portuguese heritage that the early explorers brought to Brazil. In this example, and several that follow, I have chosen to use a recording by a British youth orchestra, both because I enjoy seeing young people performing music, and because I think that seeing the performers help me hear more. My eyes guide my ears to hear things in the music that I might not otherwise hear. So here is the first theme of this composition, performed by a British youth orchestra. So this is a rather simple melody. It has a narrow range, it has short phrases, and a rather interesting syncopated rhythm that makes it uniquely Brazilian. This theme becomes the main idea of the piece, and it is heard twice. A basic principle that I find in almost all works of art is that of repetition and contrast. As we listen to the second statement of that theme, compare it with the first statement. What things are the same and what things are different?